Today's episode of the podcast is sponsored by Pure WOD. Pure WOD was created out of pure necessity. Nearly every other pre-workout on the market will make you crash, and it's filled with ingredients you can barely pronounce. The solution was to create a pre-workout supplement that adds more than it takes away. That's where Pure WOD pre-workout comes in. The Pure WOD pre-workout has been engineered to take your CrossFit, endurance, high-intensity exercise, whatever you're doing, to the next level. Pre will keep the burn down, keep you energized, and help you push beyond what you thought was possible. What's really great is that there's no artificial sweeteners, flavorings, or colorings. It's not chock full of things that are going to bring you down. It's a really healthy alternative to a lot of the pre-workout supplements out there. Head on over to purewod.com for more information. That's purewod.com, purewod.com for more information.
Paleo hackers, welcome back. With me, we got founder of Parkour Generations, one of the leading parkour educators in the world, owner of Chainstore Gym, here today to talk about scaling walls, jumping off buildings, and escaping car chases in movies, Dan Edwards.
Good to be here, Clark. Nice to meet you, man.
Good to have you, man. I'm excited for this one. Parkour is something I think a lot of people have seen, but few people have done intentionally. I'm curious, before we really get into parkour, how did you get into it? What was your entry point into this? What was your story like?
It's actually really interesting that you say people haven't done it intentionally, because you're absolutely right. Most people have done it, since they're kids, and I was the same. I grew up challenging myself and moving around my environment and exploring, and I grew up in the countryside in England, so I was kind of always out in the woods, climbing trees, jumping, running, and all that sort of stuff, fighting, just exploring the world really, and trying to find my physical and mental limits. And within that world. So we've all kind of done it. I grew up the same as anyone else. I just grew up with probably a bit more of a sort of fanatical zeal about kind of heroic stuff, and trying to make myself as capable as I could, modeling myself on that kind of those ideas that all boys grow up with, right? Of superheroes and
sure.
Action heroes and stuff like that. So I was studying martial arts and things like that since I was really tiny, and then was just fortunate enough to come across parkour really when it was very young, and there were only very few people in the world doing it in France, really, the founders, and this was before YouTube, before any parkour organizations or websites existed or anything like that. So I was just fortunate to come across those guys really quite randomly almost, and immediately recognized that what they were doing was something different, was pushing the human potential in a way that I'd never seen it pushed. So, and I realized that I didn't, at that stage, I couldn't do what they were doing, and I thought that's something lacking from my own training. I'm not as capable as those guys are. I'm not as fearless. I'm, certainly not as movement skilled. So, or as strong, or as fit, or as well balanced, So I wanted to learn it, and I managed to track down the early practitioners and start training with them. The UK had a fledgling scene of like 4 or 5 guys, and we kind of, we just began training and followed our passion really, and threw ourselves into it. And soon, before too long, we were doing it all day, every day, pretty much.
Yeah.
And it just kind of went from there. And then a few years in, it pretty much had taken over my life in terms of training, to evolve into the sort of the career path, I suppose. But that was pretty organic, we were just doing it for the love of it.
Yeah. And so with your journey, and now you're teaching, and I heard you did choreography for TV ads and movies. What was that like?
It's still a big part of what we do. So as a part of the company, our performance department does a lot of that work. So we started out, before we were an organization, me and some of the other French guys, the founders and the original sort of first and second generation practitioners, we were very early on. We were sort of asked to do things for TV commercials, for movies, to do stunts, to all these kind of uses of the discipline that when people, when producers and directors saw it, they realized it's incredibly appealing. There's a difference between what parkour athletes can do and what stuntmen can do, and there's a difference between truly doing it with no special effects and no mats or wires, and doing it with mats and wires. The sort of audience are very savvy nowadays; they can tell the difference, right? So. Yeah. Parkour had a lot of appeal, and we were asked to do that stuff very early on. Before we started teaching or anything like that, we were doing the media work. So we were doing movie stuff and TV commercials. We went from performing in them to eventually coordinating and choreographing the stuff as well. So we kind of created the idea of a parkour choreographer, which is now almost standard in most action movies to have some sort of parkour choreographer on site. Because there's parkour in pretty much every action movie now. So, but yeah, we sort of created that many years ago, and it was great fun. It's great fun working in that industry and meeting those people and working with the directors and the actors, training the actors, doing stunt doubling or performing on scene, yourself as a featured role. And it's something that our performance department still do a lot of around the world. I don't have so much time for it anymore, and it was never my main interest. I'm much more interested in the education and the training and the kind of different applications of parkour to different industries to help people find their potential. But it's really cool fun. We had a real blast doing it. I had a blast doing it, and a lot of guys, a lot of our guys, that is their livelihood is doing that performance work.
Yeah, and so. When someone asks you what is parkour, Dan, I don't know what it is, and the person listening might now, maybe this is their first time hearing the word, how would you describe it in like 101 terms for them at home right now?
So it depends on the short answer or the long answer, really. But parkour is effectively I'll try and give a mix. Parkour is it's a movement discipline. It's a way of training your body and mind through exploring and navigating the terrain around you. So just using your body to run, jump, climb, crawl, swing, balance, whatever, to get from A to B effectively, safely, quickly, and creatively. So it's really just a natural movement discipline, but just really pushing our movement to the levels that humans can achieve in terms of covering terrain. So pretty much everyone in the modern industrialized world has seen it now. If you watch TV or the movies over the last 10 years, you will have seen it. It's most commonly used in the media for sort of the rooftop chase scenes that you see in all the action movies, the James Bond, Jason Bourne, all this kind of stuff. Any of those chase scenes nowadays are pretty much basing themselves on parkour and use parkour athletes. So at its nuts and bolts, that's what it is. It's moving over terrain, but it's when you get into it and begin training it, you understand that it's actually way more a mental development thing than a physical. So you will become really fast, really fit, really strong, really agile, really capable, the way your body's meant to be. But the main growth is really mental, it's psychological, in that you begin to understand, fear. You begin to understand your limitations, your inhibitions, and the things that hold you back. They're all mental; they're not physical. So that mental transformation that you go through is the most interesting part, and that's what we really love seeing in people. We can make them better athletes. That's very easy, and there's loads of ways to do that. And you don't have to do parkour to become a better athlete, right? There's loads of ways. But the main thing about parkour is that we will see people's way of thinking will change. They'll develop real lateral thinking skills, real problem-solving skills, and they get really involved with understanding their fear and learning to manage their fear. And that carries over into the rest of their life, and that's the most interesting thing. So that's kind of, for me, that's what parkour is. It's a discipline of self-mastery.
And so if someone's listening, they hear that, okay, parkour, I want to self-master myself, I want to get agile, fit, this sounds really interesting. What is kind of like the average age that's coming and working with parkour generations or that you teach? Is it people from all ages, all different backgrounds? There, I guess you can take that anywhere you want.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's a real mix. I mean, we have our family parkour class is for 2 to 6 year olds. And they train with a parent at the same time, but so as young as 2 can join the classes, and the oldest person in our sort of senior classes is 87, I think, at the moment in London. So pretty much any, as long as you're capable to move and you're alive, you can train. You can improve that movement, right? So you can train. Obviously, the kids programs, the youth programs, from sort of 8 to 16 are hugely well attended. The kids of that age is what they do naturally anyway, and we're just we just give them a discipline to it. That's all. So we will tell them to do what most other authority figures tell them not to do. They'll say, get down off that and stop doing that. And we say, no, get up on that. And we give them a discipline to it and teach them how to do it safely and well. And they love it. So the kids programs are massive. We do stuff in schools all over the world. And then, the adult programs, obviously there's a huge demographic of kind of, 18 to 40, that range of people from all walks of life, all backgrounds, but that age bracket is probably the main age bracket in terms of training in the classes. People that want to, for all reasons, people that want to get fit, that want to, learn parkour, that want to move well, that like the community feel of it, that like the fact that it gets you outdoors and exploring your environment. But that age group, I suppose, the 18 to 40 is really probably the biggest age group of practitioners in the classes.
So this is something that people can do even if they've never parkoured before, even if they're brand new to this, they just hear this conversation, they think it sounds cool. They can get in it at a beginner level and learn safely and learn in environments. It's not day one you're out there scaling buildings and trying to jump off roofs. I mean, that's probably a huge myth that I'm sure you're tired of busting, is that people hear parkour and they're like, all right, day 2, time to go scale this wall. That's not necessarily the smartest way to go about it.
No, not at all. I mean, we and you're absolutely right. It is a myth. You can train in parkour and never go on a roof if you like. It's not a requirement at all. That's just the side that the media and that industry like to showcase because it looks cool, right?
Yeah.
And you can, once you train in parkour, you realize that you can do that stuff with relative ease. But you don't have to do that. And the majority of people who train in the classes who start as absolute beginners, they most of them don't have any interest really in going and jumping from one roof to another. They're interested in getting fit, getting healthy, and improving their movement skills. And the majority of that is done at ground level, at street level. And there's also way more interesting architecture to work with at street level than there is on rooftops. It's normally pretty flat and kind of boring. So, we do that stuff for the movies and that, but no, I mean, the 95% of all training and of all teaching is done at street level. And that's what people want to do really, and you get the most benefit from that. So, but you do have the potential once you've trained in this kind of movement stuff and you've mastered your fear and begun to understand how to manage risk in that way. You can then go and train at height as well. I mean, we do encourage people to do that if they want to go down that path and get to grips with that aspect of themselves. And you'll find that you're able to do it, and actually. It's probably not as challenging or interesting as you think. So, or as interesting and challenging as the ground level stuff.
Yeah. And so the ground level stuff, like for someone listening right now and they haven't seen a video of parkour and they're trying to picture what ground level training looks like. What does a typical routine look like, or a course on ground level?
Well, there's no typical routine. That's kind of the point. So parkour is adaptation to your environment. So whatever structures and environment you have around you, it could be a forest with trees and roots and rocks. It could be a street with, walls and railings and stairs and things like that. But the idea is to apply your movement skills to overcome these obstacles and to engage with them and navigate them and find solutions to the challenges in your path. So it could be as simple as creating a route of movement that goes over a load of walls that are 3 feet off the ground, 2 feet off the ground. Could be that simple. But in that process, you're learning to adapt to space. You're learning a lot of practical movement skills. You're learning a lot of practical mobility in order to be able to get yourself over these obstacles and open up the hips so you can step up and vault over. You're learning impact absorption to be able to land properly and absorb the impact and disperse it through the body. You're learning speed, power, agility, spatial awareness, coordination. You're vaulting, you're running, you're jumping, you're climbing, you're crawling, you're swinging. And these are the sort of movements. These are the gross motor skills that the human body is evolved to do. It's why we are this way. It's why we were built this way. That's why our hips are shaped this way. That's why our arms can brachiate. Our shoulders can do that. It's because that's how we've evolved. So we're meant to do it. And arguably, that's the best movement sort of nutrition for the body, is to do what your body is evolved to do, and that the body responds the best to that, which is why parkour athletes appear so incredibly capable to the normal person. It's not because they're superhuman; they're just using their body the way it's kind of meant to be used. It's pretty simple.
So with like, I'm curious then, with your experience, and you've been in it now for a while, and you're teaching all over, either during your stunt days or choreographing things, was there ever a time you thought you took it too far, or did you ever have any different injuries, or a time where maybe you got yourself in a situation that you felt you couldn't get out of?
Well, fortunately, so far, no, I haven't been in any situations I couldn't get out of because I'm still here. So, so that's worked out pretty well. I don't know if there's ever, I'd say there's ever a situation I've gone too far. You know, I mean, I've been a professional athlete now for almost 12 years, I guess. So, so I've picked up injuries here and there, like any professional athlete would in any sport, right? But parkour has way fewer injuries than most of the regular sports: football, rugby, horse riding. They all have way more injuries per capita than parkour does. So, I mean, I picked up a few injuries, but nothing horrendous. And injuries, you know, we see them as feedback. Really, we see them as simply a form of feedback to tell you you're doing something wrong, either psychologically or physically. You haven't got something right yet, and it's a way of your, you know, of the body sort of slapping you around the face and saying, you know, you're doing this wrong in a bad way, and I'm afraid you're going to get injured now, and that's going to teach you the lesson you need to learn. So we kind of have this odd view that parkour is that injuries are kind of just feedback and actually a good thing, because they're basically a big lesson, you know. So we learn from that. You heal, you recover, you get better, you get stronger, and then you don't repeat that mistake. Ideally, listen to your body earlier before you get to the injury state. But some of us aren't that clever. And you know, the body's going to get wear and tear from any athletic discipline. So we don't really. It's not a reason to stop training or to stop being physical. You're never going to keep your body in pristine order the whole of your life, and if you do, it probably means you're not using it. You know. So, but no, I mean, so far, you know, I've had a few injuries, but nothing horrendous, and no situation I couldn't get out of. We're very careful in parkour to train progressively, and only to attempt stuff when we're 100% sure we can do it, pretty much, you know. So it's not a risk-taking discipline in that way. It's not like most of the adventure sports that are kind of misnamed as extreme sports, you know. It's not extreme in that way of kind of seeking adrenaline rush and doing crazy stuff. Parkour is not like that at all. It's a very meditative discipline. It's a discipline about self-control and understanding what your body can do, and what your mind can do, and then applying those skills. So, you know, it's actually risk averse in some ways. Most parkour practitioners are risk averse because they don't want to get hurt, because they want to be able to train every day. So we're pretty careful about that stuff.
Yeah. How much is technique involved in parkour? I'm sure like you just drill on for hours and hours and hours of muscle movements and memories and just doing it hundreds of times. I imagine that's a huge part, but is there anything that's not technique driven that you can share over the call for like people at home, whether that be different methods of landing or different methods of like vaulting, or stuff that they could try at home, or anything like that comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting, you know, technique. The word technique is an interesting word, and parkour does have there's a lot of biomechanical training that goes into it, right? To understand how your body moves optimally, how it absorbs impact optimally, how it exerts power optimally, all this kind of stuff, right? And we train that a lot, yeah. So we do repeat the movements over and over and over again, as with any discipline, trying to master what they are, trying to master skill, you know. Having said that, when we teach, we always teach the way we say it is attributes over technique. So we teach that the attributes of your movement are more important than any individual technique in isolation. So attributes, by that we mean things like the strength, the solidity, the grace of it, the fluidity, the softness, you know, the power, whatever. These are attributes of movement, and if you've got those attributes down, that sort of, you know, coordination, the spatial awareness, the agility, if you've got those concepts down and you're moving well, without too much thought, then technique comes second. You know, the techniques will come as you need them. and techniques evolved in parkour as a response to different challenges, to different environments. So people can immediately take up this kind of training. We do recommend they get guidance and help from someone if they really want to get into it. But there's no reason why, as a human being, you can't go out and explore your environment and start moving around like you do when you're a kid, right? Kids do it without any instruction. They'll just go and climb trees. They'll go and clamber over walls. They'll balance along walls. They'll crawl under things. They'll swing on tree branches. We all do it growing up, and we survive. So it's a form of play, right? So there's no reason as an adult you can't go and get back in touch with that and go and move out and just explore your world and play around, as long as you take it very progressively, gradually, gently, build up to it, depending on your level of fitness and strength, what you've got at the moment. There's no reason why you can't start doing that straight away. And that doesn't require technique so much. It just requires the development of attributes. Okay.
When you're about to do like pretty intense parkour routine, or I know you can practice, but sometimes if you're not in the moment, it goes totally wrong. And that's for anything, even like these interviews. I can prep till I'm blue in the face, but if I'm not in the moment, it just doesn't happen as well. You just have some days where it's not happening. So do you do anything to get yourself mentally ready before you do the routine or anything like that? Do you have any mental rituals?
Mindfulness, what I would call mindfulness, I guess, is hugely important in parkour. So being fully engaged with what you're doing is hugely important. And yeah, there are loads of different ways to get into that state of mind. And you can do it organically through physical practice. A decent warm-up where you're attending to your body and the mobility patterns of your body and getting the muscles work, getting the heart going, that will do it, right? That will integrate your body and mind. So the warm-up is really the key part for that reason. Because you want to get into that kind of flow state, right? The Csikszentmihalyi Mihaly talks about, or peak performance, Maslow called it, or whatever, in the zone, athletes today call it. That's the vital thing. That's the optimal state to train in. And you want to be in that state. Now, the good thing about parkour is that it kind of automatically puts you in that state. And the reason being is that you can't really do a discipline like parkour without being mentally fully engaged with it, because it's the movements are quite complex, dynamic movements. Yeah, so they require you to be thinking and there. They require you to be involved. You can't just it's not the same as getting on a treadmill, putting on your headphones and thinking about your chicken dinner while you plod along, right? Right. Because in parkour, if you do that, you're gonna hit a wall or a railing or,
you get injured,
or fall on your ass.
Yeah.
So there are consequences to not being aware of what you're doing in parkour. So kind of right from the beginning of the training, it puts you in the flow state. So in a way, you don't need to think about preparing yourself for the zone, because it immediately gets you there, which is really a powerful thing. And I think one of the most powerful elements of parkour is that it's a way to access the flow state for anyone, anywhere. Because most of the adventure disciplines will put you into the flow state. If you jump out of a plane with a wingsuit on, you're straight away in the flow state, right? Because if you mess it up, it's a long fall. When you're skateboarding, it kind of puts you in the flow state because you're on this thing with wheels and you've got to really focus. All the kind of adventure disciplines will do that automatically, surfing, etc., because there's a consequence to not being there, right? You got skin in the game in a way. But the problem with all of those, not the problem, but the limiting factor of all of those is that they normally require either very specialized equipment, very expensive settings, such as a plane to jump out of, or a mountain to ski down, or whatever, or waves to surf on, and often specialist areas or training, to do that. Some sort of there's barriers to entry, right? Whereas parkour, you just go outside. So there's no barriers to entry. Anyone can do it. You don't need to have any money. You don't need any special equipment. And so it's a way that anyone can kind of access their flow state quite easily. And that's the real power of it, I think. And that's what we love to that's why it's such a useful vehicle to teach with.
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm totally seeing when I'm watching the videos of people doing parkour. Is you can't not be in flow state. And that's something I've been fascinated with now for the past couple years, is people's different rituals to get in that flow state. And I think Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi was the researcher who really came up with and coined that term, flow state. And he put it on he put a graph that was really cool, and on one axis it had skill, and the other axis, the long one, had challenge.
Yeah.
And that when you're right in between there, when it's balanced in the middle, that's your flow state. So when you have enough skill and enough challenge. But and then it was cool because if you have too much skill and not enough challenge, well, you get boredom. And that's why, if you're in a class that's too easy for you, you're zoning out in school and you're getting disruptive and you're throwing things at the teacher. But if you have too much challenge and not enough skill, then you get anxiety, and that's where you get overwhelmed. The opposite, like if you're taking a test you didn't study for, and it's like, oh my God, this thing is so challenging, I'm so anxious about it. And so I can imagine that really applies with parkour and everything, because like if you have not enough skill and too much challenge on a course, you're going to get anxious, psych yourself out, and not be there. And if you have too much skill and not enough challenge, you're just going to be bored with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's that finding that middle zone, right? It's sometimes called edge work. Is the optimal place for development as a human being in any skill, not just in physical skills, but in also anything, right? Academic, psychological, emotional, whatever, is where you're on the cusp of success and failure. That edge zone between comfort and impossibility is the key zone to be in. If you can be in that zone all of the time when you train, you will progress really, really quickly. That's where the gains are made. So that edge work idea is critical, and parkour pretty much takes you to the edge work area very quickly, because you'll find that it requires an absolute combination of all your psychological skills and your physical skills to pull off even what might seem, when you're looking at it, when you're watching it, quite simple things. A lot of people look at parkour and go, oh, it's easy, I can do it. But then when they try it, when they actually get up and look at jumping from this wall to this wall or climbing over this or whatever, suddenly it's like, oh, it's actually much harder than they thought. And that's because it requires a combination of body and mind. And it's that most people don't do that very often. So it's much harder than it looks in many ways. It's simpler than it looks in a way, but it's also harder than it looks. But it takes you to that edge zone straight away, yeah. And then you're absolutely right, man. That's the place to be if you want to progress.
What about overthinking? How do you? Because I'm imagining, like, if you're doing a parkour stunt, it's easy to overthink and psych yourself out for it. Do you have any techniques you use or any tips for people who have overthinking issues?
Yeah, it's a big thing. It's a huge thing, not only in parkour but in all disciplines, obviously. And again, it takes you out of the flow state, right? As soon as you start thinking too much and trying to control the movement, trying to control your mental state, that's your first self, that's your conscious self doing it, and that breaks you out of the flow. But equally, if you try not to overthink, you're still overthinking, right? So. Yeah. It's for me, the way we do it, we have many ways of doing it, but the main way of doing it is getting people to enter into a state or practice a thing that's known as deliberate practice, which is a phrase first coined by a guy called I think Anders Ericsson about 30-40 years ago. And deliberate practice has been seen to be the way that all the premier athletes in the world get to where they are, and it's basically there's a lot to it, but if I'm really quick, the concept is pick one thing and focus on that one thing to incredible detail in your training session. And it can be a very small thing, but focus on getting that exactly right. Now, and by doing that, because you're concentrating on one thing, so it could be, for example, in a running jump, in parkour, precision jump, it could be you're focusing solely on having a super accurate landing. Right, that's it. So you're focusing completely on the accuracy of your landing, the perfection of that landing exactly on the balls of the feet, landing pad of the foot, exactly connecting with the edge of the obstacle you're landing on, good deceleration and all that. But you're only concentrating on the accuracy. By concentrating only on one thing, you have this kind of spotlight attention, and it means the rest of the movement is taken care of by the unconscious self. So that stops you overthinking because you're just focusing on one thing. Overthinking is normally where you're trying to focus on the accuracy and the speed and the power and your position in space and your body structure, and trying to do all that stuff at one time, and that doesn't work. The brain can't do that. So we focus on deliberate practice, and we do that mainly through, as I'm sure through what coaches call cueing, which is by giving people one piece of information at a time to focus on, and normally making an external or an extrinsic cue. So it's not something that they have to think about a lot. So, for example, if you tell someone an intrinsic cue, for example, which is the opposite, which is not so useful, something like contract the glutes, right? That's an intrinsic cue. And for a lot of people, it doesn't really mean a lot. A lot of people might not know where their glutes are. They don't know what it feels like to contract them. They can't do it. But if you give them an extrinsic cue, like jump as far as you can, right? They will automatically use their posterior chain as powerfully as they can because they're trying just to achieve an outcome. So it's an external cue. So that is a way of getting around the overthinking. You just give them something very simple and very specific to think about, and the rest of their movement is taken care of by the unconscious mover.
Or like
that's one way of doing it.
In college, I love that concept of a cue. That's really fascinating. It popped in my head while you were talking. Like in college, we were going over movement patterns for functional anatomy, and my professor had one when you're squatting, doing a deep squat on the way up. Sometimes your knees have a tendency to buckle in. So if you're like, posterior rotate your knees or laterally, it's complicated. So he would say, show your crotch. And so you would, and naturally doing it, your knees would start to go out and your squat form would get a lot better. And so now when I'm squatting, that's what I hear in my mind is show your crotch. And so every single leg workout, boom, right there. And then naturally the squat gets better.
Perfect. That's an external cue. And that means the guy's a good coach because you remember it and you do it. So it's effective coaching. Whereas, something like, engage, tilt the hips or externally rotate the femurs or whatever, who the fuck remembers that? No, who knows what that is? So, but yeah, something simple as show the crotch, boom, you remember it, you do it for the rest of your life.
Well, and Dan, I think it was cool what you brought up about deliberate practice. That's a big one, even to relate it to people at home listening who might not do parkour, but, they're in the gym 3 times a week. The deliberate practice there could look like, it'd be easy to go to the gym and just go through the motions and get on a treadmill or maybe even go through your weightlifting exercise. But deliberate practice would look like being really conscious about every single movement you're doing. Okay, I'm doing a bench press, contracting my pecs while I do it, trying to pull the bar away or push the bar away. It's a totally different workout. It's a totally different feeling.
100%. And deliberate practice is pretty, if you look into this stuff now and look into what's known as the science of expertise and learn effective learning strategies, you will find a huge amount of information on it, huge amount of scientific studies that basically demonstrate that anyone who's ever become really good at anything, as in really good, world class, they did it through deliberate practice, and that it is pretty much the key to achieving mastery of anything. And if you're not training like that, or not learning like that, or not studying like that, it's going to be very random, very slow, and very ineffective. So anyone who wants to learn anything, not only physical stuff, it could be music, it could be driving a car, it could be learning another language. If you understand the principles of deliberate practice, you will learn it a lot quicker, a lot more effectively, and you'll save yourself time and you'll be able to learn other stuff. So you just become a better version of yourself. So it's absolutely key to training anything.
Well, that's where coaching comes in, because now you get the feedback from someone else who can hold you accountable and say, hey, Clark, you're not showing up when you're drumming, you're just sitting down playing through songs, instead of like, hey, you need to actually do your rudiments and work on these fills or these, you're lagging when you go into courses or something like that. I'm just thinking in musical terms. But even for health, if someone's out there struggling and they hire a personal trainer, talk about deliberate practice, you're going to get a different workout with that trainer,
Yes. Yeah, that is a step toward exactly good guidance, good teaching. A good source of information is a key element in deliberate practice, but you got to make sure it's a good source of information. So getting a trainer is a good step. But if the trainer is bad and doesn't know how to use deliberate practice as the core of their coaching, then it will be kind of just a waste of your time and money. So because they'll be telling you to do very ineffective stuff which you could do by yourself for free. So it's a case of not only having the wherewithal to apply a coach and get a coach for your training. It's a good step, man. But it's there's a lot of ineffective coaches out there. We hate to say it, but there are. It's a case of finding a good coach who understands that concept.
Yeah. So Dan, we normally have some closing questions. I have a feeling we're gonna spend some time on these, so I wanted to bring them a little early. To kick off the party on the closing questions, what's one thing you've learned this year that's been like the biggest lesson for Dan? Anything popping into mind?
Yeah, I think I'm always trying to learn stuff, right? Anyway, so because I'm stupid and I need to learn things, so I'm always trying to learn as many things as possible. But I think recently, probably the biggest takeaway from the last sort of 12 months, I guess, would be to slow down more. And to just and also just to stop at times, just to stop and be, and take that time literally to do nothing, because I've been for most of my life, I guess, but especially for the last 10 years, building what we built around the world and all that. It's been very hectic, and 100% go all the time, and part of me really enjoys that and really thrives on that. So I didn't mind doing it, but there comes a time when you realize it's actually not. It's more effective to slow down and to take time to stop and have a slow build into things in the morning. Maybe it's like that old parable that said the Buddhist student who goes to his master and says, I really want to achieve enlightenment as quickly as possible. How long I'm trying to think how to word it, but he basically wants to achieve it as quick as possible, and he says, if I really want to achieve enlightenment, how long will it take? And the guy says, basically, if you meditate for 4 hours a day, it'll take you 10 years. And then the guy says, okay, so what about if I give up everything and really just devote myself to it, and I have just I really want to get there as quickly as possible? He says, well, if you have that approach, then it will be 4 hours a day for 20 years. Huh. And the guy says, well, why is it twice as long? And he says, because you're trying to get there too quickly, you're rushing it, and that is basically you're trying to force it, so it's not going to happen. So just slow down. And I really like that kind of approach, and I think I've definitely found its help. So the biggest lesson I've learned is take time out, man. Just take time to be, and that doesn't mean going off and finding other things to distract yourself, but actually finding a way to avoid distraction and just sit with what is and be, So that's probably the best lesson I've learned in the last year.
Do you carve that time out, or because I know, like, for me, I've said, okay, it's important to slow down and do things mindfully and the whole nine, but I'm still rushing around and filling up time, trying to be as busy as I can, as productive as I can. And I realize, like, if I don't actually carve time out, I still kind of am turned on. I'm not all the way off. Like, so do you carve time out to do that?
Yeah, I think you have to, man. And the thing is, you'll discover, or I certainly discovered, that you become more productive by doing less. So, and that's because you're more considered in what you do, and therefore you do stuff that is more effective. You don't waste time with busy work, or just distracting yourself and getting distracted. You're very focused. So, for example, if you take the time in the morning to spend half an hour or an hour in meditation and just sitting there and just being, right? A lot of people would say, man, with that hour I could do so much. But the fact that you spend that hour doing that, it means it completely aligns you to your purpose that day. So you then know exactly what is important to do that day. And you will do those things straight away. You'll be fully engaged, fully focused, and you do those things, bang, and they're done. Whereas if you don't do that and you rush off doing 1,000 things and immediately answer emails, and you just get distracted in the whole busy work thing, which is easy to do in the modern world, right? Of answering emails and doing this and checking that and calling. And the end of the day comes and you realize you haven't actually done the really important things you had to do. So it's a very ineffective thing.
Yeah.
So I think it's a case of do one thing at a time, that one thing approach. What's the most important thing I have to do today? And the only way you can know that is by actually sitting with yourself for a little bit of time, even if it's just 10 seconds, but just slowing down a bit and thinking, what is actually that I have to do? What's the most important thing to do? And then prioritize that. And everything else you just leave, you just ignore. You just do that one thing. So I think you do have to carve time out. I do carve time out to train every day, by myself, or with others, but just training, not work, and to meditate, and then even time just literally just to do nothing. Just I haven't got anything planned. I'm just going to do nothing, see what comes up, and that's a very creative time normally. So yeah, and I haven't found that I've been less productive. I haven't found that I've achieved less. It generally makes you happier, less stressful, and you achieve more. So I fully recommend it.
Yeah, that's when you were talking about doing less and kind of setting your day up. What's the most important task? Meditating. I've pictured Stephen Covey's sharpening the saw in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I'm sure everyone listening's probably heard it, but if they haven't, there's that story where there's two guys cutting down trees, and one of them's just whacking away at the tree with his axe over and over and over again, and the other guy's just sitting there sharpening his saw. And then after a while, he goes over to him. He's like, "Hey man, you should probably sharpen your blade. It doesn't look like it's working." And the guy who's whacking at the tree says, "What do you mean sharpen the blade? I'm too busy cutting down this tree." And so it's kind of that. If you sharpen the blade, it cuts twice as fast, and sometimes that's working smarter, not just harder. And that's what you're talking about, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, that comes from an Abraham Lincoln quote originally, which was, "If I had 6 hours to cut down a tree, I would spend 4 hours sharpening the axe."
Yeah, that's a good one.
And it is exactly right. Yeah, the more preparation that you can have, the more focused you can be before you begin a project. As in, the more you know what outcomes you want, how it's going to begin. The more you can kind of spend time preparing, and to do that, you need to spend time thinking what you want from it. The quicker and more effective it'll be, rather than just charging in and hoping it's going to work out. So, yeah, I mean, take time, slow down, and also, take the time to think about what you really want to achieve, and what's going to get you that, rather than just randomly going off in search of vague ideals and things like that you've been told.
So, Desert Island Game, Dan gets one book to bring or one resource to bring. What do you choose? I've done this question before. It's incredibly hard now because I read a lot. But one book to bring. Third book for me, I guess. Right. I would probably bring. I would probably end up bringing one of the many books by Jiddu Krishnamurti, who's an Indian sage and Indian philosopher, I suppose he was. He's just a super clever guy, didn't adhere to any religion or any faith, but just an incredibly clever thinker. And his way of his way of looking at things is so clear and direct, that it's just useful, to every now and again to step back into that and be reminded of very clear objective thinking. So, and I've studied his stuff since I was a kid. Do you have a book that you would recommend people look at first? Like, what's your favorite one of his?
Yeah, I mean, he spoke all around the world for decades with many of the best thinkers of the age, and most of those were turned into dialogues. Most of those dialogues were turned into books. But I suppose the best a good way to get into it is a book called Freedom from the Known, which is quite thin, and it kind of gives you an overview of many of his ideas on many subjects. It's quite hard in many ways for a lot of people, I think, and it was for me, because he's so clear and so bright that he doesn't mix his words, and he can be quite ruthless with his philosophy in a way. But there's no denying that he's kind of right. Yeah. So it's
bluntness.
It's a mental discipline reading his stuff, and I like that.
Yeah. Some of those deep thinkers who are they don't put any prefaces or any. They'll be talking about one thing, and then they'll just give an example that's so out of left field, but they just throw it in there anyway. Like Osho's another one of those guys who always throws in weird left field examples, but they work somehow. Those are good. All right, Dan. Well, so before we close, I know we spent the first bit talking about parkour, and I don't want to leave people hanging. Where can people go to get into parkour if they're interested, or what's your recommendation for that?
Well, I mean, our website obviously is probably the best resource. That's parkourgenerations.com, and that from that you can get linked to all of the other sort of national websites that we have. We have a group in America, we have a group in Brazil, we have a group in Korea, whatever. So you can hook up with those guys via our central website. It's got pretty good information, all the events we run, all the teaching, all the certification programs. So that's probably the best sort of central resource, I guess. But always the best resource is to find a good coach or a good instructor, a good guide near you who you can learn from. So there's nothing beats personal interaction with someone and that kind of one-to-one tuition, right? So so I'd say that's the best resource, if you can get it, and you can find a good list of those qualified instructors via our website and via the Adapt Qualifications website, which is the certifications website. That's got a list of all the certified instructors around the world. So that's pretty useful. Yeah.
And you have a certification, correct? It's the ADAPT?
Yeah, Adapt. So Adapt. Yeah. Kind of
not an acronym. Yeah.
Yeah, the acronym stands for Art de Déplacement and Parkour Teaching. So it's run all around the world. I think we've delivered it in 30 countries now. It's accredited by most of the major accreditation bodies in the world. And it's the pathway to become a parkour coach. We also have the Parkour Fitness Specialist education program, which is more geared towards fitness professionals and fitness enthusiasts who want to understand how to include these kind of movement principles into their programming and their training for their clients and stuff. So that's pretty cool as well, and it's a slightly different focus from the pure, I want to coach parkour. Yeah. This is more, okay, I want to understand the movement principles and the strength and conditioning principles that work in parkour, and how can I apply them to my clients. So both those education programs are accessible around the world now, and they're good fun.
Parkour Generations, that's PARKOUR generations.com. And Dan Edwards, everybody, thanks for coming on, Dan. This was a really fun show. I appreciate your time. Definitely a first for the Paleo Hacks, learning about jumping off buildings and all that fun stuff.
Absolute pleasure, Clark. It's been really, really good to talk, man. And it's happy to spread the good word. And if you get a chance to try parkour out yourself, do it.
Yeah, I will. No buildings anytime soon, but I'll definitely take a look at the site and see if there's anything very amateur that I can try out here in Seattle.
Good approach.
All right, man. Until next time.
Thanks, Clark. Cheers, man.
All right, that's it. Fascinating show. I hope you enjoyed it thoroughly. Again, that's Dan from Parkour Generations. Have his website right here. You can just go to parkourgenerations.com. That's PARK like park, OUR, so parkourgenerations.com. Aside from that, paleohacks.com is the place to be for our archives. Head on over there and make sure you've listened to every episode. Don't want to miss anything, or the ones that interest you. You don't have to listen to them all. And then if you want to get a hold of me, you can reach me at Clark Dangerous on social media. And the last thing I'll say is I just launched my first ever Ultimate Guide to Keeping a Journal course. So we go through this and we show you how to use a little $7 journal and turn it into the best tool you can use for your self-growth, development, and happiness, really. That's what it's all about. So mybestjournal.com if you want to learn more about that, how to turn your journal into the best book you've ever read. Next week, we have Abel James coming on to talk about his big experience being a TV star, getting recognized in supermarkets and whatnot. That'll be really fun. That was a good show. I always enjoy talking to Abel. He's got a lot of energy and positivity. So if you want some laughs, be sure to tune in next week. Got a few more shows scheduled on the calendar to record, but many of you know we are coming to an end with the Paleo Hacks podcast. Starting in October, we will not be producing the show any longer. It was a mutual decision between Paleo Hacks and myself. Just moving on, focusing our energies and time into other projects and other things. So the archives will remain free. They'll stay up there. And you can go back through and listen to the shows whenever you want at your own pace. We have over 100 shows. So, I mean, honestly, if you did that one a week, it would still take you 2 years. So you could listen to it for 2 years if you wanted to. But again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for your support over these past 3 years. Started doing the show as an intern in college, just trying to get, health credits and stuff. And it turned into something that sustained me through many years. Got to travel the world, got to have a lot of great experiences, meet tons of cool people, have amazing conversations I was privileged to have with people I would otherwise never get to talk to one-on-one for an hour. So, in terms of a growing tool, it was phenomenal. Can't say enough great things. But be sure to head over there to paleohacks.com, support the show by downloading the archives or getting on the community over there. All right, that's it. I'll see you back here next week. Have a great week. See you then.